Hi! Okay, let's talk about some early developmental history of this region/state of Japan. I entitled this little section, Laggards to Loners. Laggards to loners, what? Lagging behind to being loners, isolationist. How can that be, Japan? We think of Japan in today's world as the second largest economy on planet Earth, as a leader of technology and of economy and life expectancy and living standards. And therefore, we hypothesize, they're number one now as an Asian power, so they must have always been number one, and they're just carrying that forward. And that's a perfectly logical hypothesis, which is completely and utterly wrong, because the Japanese culture is actually the late bloomer, the laggard of Asian civilizations. What do I mean by that? Well, the Chinese may have been around for 4,000 or 5,000 years. The Koreans 3,000 or 4,000. The Indians 4,000 or 5,000 or 6,000. Even the Thais and the Vietnamese for thousands of years. Japan really starts as a group of people from Central Asia and Mongolia. The Japanese ethnic stock traces its origins back to Central Asia, folks migrating over Asia, through the Korean Peninsula, over to Japan, and that doesn't even start till like the 400 BC, and the semblance of something we call distinctly Japanese isn't until about 400 or 500 AD. That's right, that's on this side of the Jesus timeline. It's really not that long ago in the bigger picture. And this movement of folks from Asia, through Korea, to Japan, also tips us off to how Japanese culture evolved. Borrowing things from Asia. Like the people flowed, so did ideas and influences and philosophies. Everything that comprised the basic core units of the Japanese society and culture really came from Asia. And a lot of people have that backwards in today's world too, thinking that Asia copied Japan. It's actually quite the inverse. And what am I talking about here? Well, everything really. The Japanese actually fully embraced Chinese writing styles, and then they kind of made it distinctly their own Japanese, but they based it on Chinese writing systems. Philosophical traditions like Taoism were borrowed from the Chinese. Buddhism was borrowed from the Indians via the Chinese through the Korean Peninsula and became a major shaping force of Japanese thought. But everything in the arts as well, pottery, metallurgy, metalworking, all levels of technology, of production, of art pieces, of painting, of even furniture. And architecture, of course, has distinctive Asian overtones to it. Even the martial arts. We think about all the cool martial arts named in the world today, karate or judo, and those are Japanese names. But all the martial arts evolved out of China and Korea. So it's a flowing of all things Asian into Japan, specifically even governmental styles. The Japanese really adopted and embraced Confucianism from the Chinese as a system of thought and of ruling their country. And speaking of their country, we really don't have until about 600 or 700 AD, again, only about 1,300 years ago, the semblance of something we would say that's a state. It's about 700, 680 to be exact, AD, that the Japanese say, hey, we are Japanese. Here's our culture. We are putting an emperor in charge of us. Here's our imperial line, our imperial state of Japan. We are distinctly different from everybody else. And they start to show up in historical record of the Chinese and Koreans and other folks as well. It's important to note as a little side note, the Yamato dynasty, that is the imperial line in Japan, starting with Emperor Jimmu back in 680. It's a single continuous line, family line, on up to the present day. I know, it's crazy. The Yamato dynasty is the oldest continuous hereditary monarchy in the world throughout all history. It's the same group of folks that have been in charge from the origins of the state right on up into right now. And that's right, Japan being a constitutional monarchy, they still have an emperor as a figurehead, head of state. And that's important to note because the emperor even 1,000 years ago was a figurehead. The real power in early history of Japan was wielded by influential court nobles, important people, and mostly military governors that we know as shogun. Shogun are military governors. They held the real power, had control over big swaths of the country, and a system that's almost identical to the feudal system which was going on in medieval Europe at roughly the exact same time. We think of medieval Europe, right? And knights in shining armor and all that stuff. You have the king at the top of the pyramid, and underneath him are several, say, dukes, and each duke controls a swath of territory. Under the dukes, each duke has a bunch of lords or counts or earls, which control smaller sections of that territory, and the peasant base is tied to the land. The peasants have to grow all the food, give half their food to their appropriate earl or count, and then the count gets all that food, and he gives half to the duke that he's under, and the duke collects up everything, and he gives half to the king. And that's how it works. And of course, all of these earls and counts and lords and dukes are fighting amongst each other for more territory, more resources, and more land. You have the exact same thing going on in Japan, again, roughly at the same time. 700, 800, 1000 AD. It's the same system, different names, cooler costumes. Instead of a king, you have the emperor at the top of the food chain. Underneath him are the shogun, those military governors I just referenced. And there are family lineages. The shogun is a clan, basically. And underneath each shogun are daimyos, feudal lords with a lot of power. And underneath them are getting the peasant base. And much like in merry old England, where you had knights fighting each other, the knights were the military backbone for each of the counts, the lords, and the dukes. You have the samurai warriors that are the military muscle in feudal Japan, fighting for each shogun family. And again, much like Europe, this is a constant state of warfare where one shogun clan or daimyo is fighting up for more resources or territory and the little fiefdom next door. Maybe they want more land, maybe more food resources, maybe there's a hot geisha girl next door that they want to go claim. So they send out their samurai to go fight those other samurai. And there are epic samurai battles for hundreds of years. This system perpetuates itself, which is why there are thousands of great samurai movies that you can go out and rent, all based on this era. The age of the shogun, the classic age, roughly about 1000 to 1580 AD. Again, not that long ago, roughly the same time feudalism is going on in Europe. Now, the reason I point out this whole feudal system is because it's going to come to an end at about 1580, 1600. I always like to round things off. And it comes to an end by the Tokugawa shogunate. One single shogun family, comes to power. These guys are so strong, they essentially defeat all the other shogun clans and families to consolidate power in the entire country for the first time ever in Japanese history, roughly in 1600. They reunite all the armies, and they plunge the country into global isolationism. Now we'll get to that in just a second. There are a couple of major points of what the Tokugawa shogunate does, which significantly transforms Japanese society. They bring to end 600 years of perpetual conflict. Because they are a single family in charge of the entire country now, there's no more fighting. There's no more great samurai epic battles. Who's going out to chop off anybody's heads? It's the Tokugawa peace era. It's 250 years of peace. There's no fighting. It's all settled. It's done. These guys are in charge. So what is the Japanese people going to do with all this latent, pent-up samurai energy? Point one. They turn inward and really invest in Japanese culture. There's a huge explosion of artistic energy during this Tokugawa period into Japanese arts and Japanese culture and everything Japanese. They really make the place more Japanesey than it's ever been before. What am I specifically talking about? All manner of arts and architecture. Things like gardens, beautiful Zen gardens and rock gardens you've seen that have meticulous attention to detail. It's kind of a Japanese trait. And even trees as art. Tree trimming, bonsai becomes an art form. Great palaces and temples are built. Several types of Japanese theater are evolved out. The most famous one you probably heard of is kabuki. It's a type of theater, and it's not just a Japanese steakhouse, kabuki. But poetry, novels, calligraphy, great works of art are written. And speaking of art, you probably recognize wood block art is a famous art style that comes out of the Tokugawa peace era, where you see this great attention to detail in natural scenes and even battle scenes and pastoral scenes that's very distinctly Japanese. And another distinct style that comes out of this period is bunjinja painting, you probably recognized in art galleries around the world. And on top of that, the Tokugawa do something else very, very unique. In this focus on all things Japanese to make themselves more Japanese and be so awesome, they educate everybody. What? That's crazy. 400 years ago. They decide, hey, based on Confucian principle of proper rule and building a great society, they say everybody should be smart. Everybody should be literate. Everybody should be able to read. How can you be a good Japanese person? And again, this is kind of a pro-nationalist thing. And they're really building in a sense of Japaneseness, is that we're all in this together. This is a single country. And you all should read so that you can read our great history and know what's going on. And they educate all the kids, all of them. Even the girls. That is crazy several hundred years ago. Very forward thinking. What's not so forward thinking with the Tokugawa, though, is point 2. They do plunge the country into global isolationism. What does that mean? They essentially just cut off all outside contact with the rest of the world. They have this era of peace and all this proliferation of art and energy, and that's good enough for them. They say, hey, we've borrowed stuff from Asia for centuries, but now it's our time. We're making everything our way. And we're not interested in trade. We're not interested in your other religions. We're not interested in any of your stuff. So when a British ship sails up to the shore and says, hey, jolly ho, we'd like to trade with you, the shogun would send out the samurai to be like, tay, and you just got your head chopped off. And then they'll burn the ship and kill all the crew. We're not interested in that. And then maybe a little later, a Christian missionary shows up. Hey, I'd like to spread the good word of tay. You just got your head chopped off too. We don't do that here. We're not interested in interference from the outside world. So focusing inward, proliferation of the arts, but global isolationism as well. However, what's happening in the rest of the world? Duh! This exact period, 1600 to about 1850, it's the exact period where the Europeans and the Americans and others are going out and taking over the rest of the world. The age of European imperialization, of colonization, of advancing military technology to a point and shipping technology that they can go take over India and the Middle East and Africa. And that's what's happening. And the Tokugawa ain't fools. They see this going on, but they think the cure is to further isolate themselves. And again, they're not clueless. They do have some trade that's opened up. A couple of heavily regulated ports, regulated by the shogunate. So they see what's happening, they get news, and they say, no, we're not interested in any of that, so we're going to make it even harder to get in here. We're not going to allow those foreigners to get in here, and they're in a particularly savvy physical situation to be able to pull this off. How so? Remember back to the last section. It's a group of islands, rocky islands, mountainous islands with very few good natural ports. It's an extremely easy area to defend. So the Tokugawa can pull it off for some time. On top of that, they are very far away from all other folks. They're called the Far East for a reason by the British and the Europeans, because they're very far east. So it takes a long time for the Europeans to get to them. They already took over Africa and India and Southeast Asia, and the Japanese are kind of the last to go. So 250 years, the Tokugawa peace era, they get away with keeping out foreign intervention pretty good. But you know the writing's on the wall. You know they can't pull this off forever, because you know the end of the history here. Sooner or later, the outside world is going to evolve technology that can overcome the and that year comes in 1853. I don't often have dates, but know that one. 1853 is when this dude named Perry shows up with a bunch of battleships in Tokyo Bay. He departs in a small boat, goes up to the locals and says, hello, I'd like to open up trade with you. We have some good merchandise we'd like to trade with you. And promptly the shogun send out the samurai to say, yeah! And Admiral Perry says, hold on, friends. Before you chop my head off, because I know you're prone to do things like that. Take a look out there in the bay. Those big black ships, those are ironclad battleships. You see the little black things sticking out the side? We call those cannons. And right now, you've got a butt-ton of ammunition pointed at you and your entire city. So choose your words and sword movements carefully. And the samurai say, we screwed. And they were. The Tokugawa shogunate, almost like flipping on a light switch, realizes, holy crap, we have gotten so technologically behind, we cannot possibly compete with them. Those are serious looking ships, and there's a lot of them. And they got cannons, and they got guns, lots of guns. And guess what? Fighting gun, guess who's going to win? So the Tokugawa immediately like, whoa, we are completely not going to cut your head off, man. Dudes, what are we going to do? And what they did was not much. It was the United States under Admiral Perry in 1853 which forcibly opened up Japanese trade to the outside world after 250 years of full-on isolation. Once the U.S. had opened the doors, the floodgates were open, and the British, the Dutch, everybody else comes in there too. Everybody forces Japan to sign completely humiliating trade treaties, which essentially say, hey, the outside world gives ourselves the right to come in and do anything we want, to trade what we want, to buy what we want, to sell what we want to your people. The Tokugawa were completely decimated, and this sets the stage for major change because this intervention by foreigners into this great Japanese culture, fiercely proud, never been invaded, isolationism, propped up their Japanesiness, and suddenly now they're at the mercy of outsiders. This is the catalyst, the impetus, the spark that lights the fuse for an explosion of change in Japan like never seen before. An explosion that's called the Meiji Restoration. And we'll get to that next.